Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Monday, August the 25th, 2025. Today I want to talk about the case of Lucy Connolly, and she is a woman in Britain who's just spent 10 months in prison for making a tweet. The tweet was rather extreme. She said words to the effect that, for all she cared, hotels housing immigrants could be burnt down. And I mean, she was responding to an incident that was pretty horrific when a teenager of immigrant background who had actually been born in the UK walked into a Taylor Swift themed workshop, I think relating to yoga and dance, and killed 3 girls, very young girls. I think one of them was age 6, and so the country was, on fire at the time she made the tweet, and she did take the tweet down pretty soon after making it, but still, it ended up in her going to prison for 10 months, and so she's now been released. And so she is sort of a major news story in the UK. But before I talk about Lucy Connolly, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Monday, August 25th, 2025. So here is the chart for today. Don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. Of course, on top right, that is a picture of Lucy Connolly. So as far as what's going on today, so looking at the picture for New York at noon, you can see that the moon is at 0 degrees Libra. So sort of late morning in the Americas, certainly late morning Eastern Standard Time. The moon enters Libra. So that is a big change. The moon has been in Virgo, and it does remind us that the immediate phase of the new moon, when the sun and the moon, were both in Virgo, that is over. So we've got a waxing moon. It's not quite, we're not quite able to see it, but we are in a new cycle, and with the moon in Libra, perhaps we're able to think things through. Moon is in an air sign, and we have ideas, and there is a grand trine in air signs. You can see that when the moon moves into Libra, it makes a trine to Uranus, and it makes a trine to Pluto. It also makes an opposition to Saturn, so that gives us a kite. So a kite is when you've got a grand trine cut with an opposition, and you've got 2 sextiles. So you've got Saturn sextile Pluto, Saturn sextile Uranus. So that grand trine, it's quite an important event. So by the way, if you're in the UK or Europe, the moon moves into Libra sort of in the afternoon. So in the UK, it moves into Libra at 8 minutes past 3 in the afternoon. That would be 8 minutes past 4 in the afternoon in London or Paris. So if you're in Australia or New Zealand, well, it's not going to be until very late that the moon moves into this sign. But the moon is making a lot of aspects, as I've just shown you, and additionally we have Mercury making a couple of sesquiquadrates. So here is Mercury at 16 Leo. It's making a sesquiquadrate to Saturn, and it's making a sesquiquadrate to Neptune. So Mercury sesquiquadrate Saturn, we have to be a bit careful about that, because when you do have this aspect, you can feel a bit down. Mercury is the way we think, it's the way we perceive, and so when Mercury is sesquiquadrate Saturn, we might be overly negative. Alternatively, we might say things that we later regret, or even tweet things that we later regret, because Mercury is about communication, and it's about feeling frustrated and perhaps feeling one has to lash out if it is sesquiquadrate Saturn, because that can be how Saturn works. Saturn can be about harsh language, and then Mercury sesquiquadrate Neptune, we may communicate perhaps on a spur of a moment. We say something and we didn't really think it through. Though possibly the main event today is Venus moving into Leo. So that is a change. The Venus has been in Cancer. You can see that at noon, New York time, Venus was at 29 degrees 55 minutes Cancer, but later in the day we get Venus in Leo. So that means that we will have two planets in Leo. We've already got Mercury in Leo, then we put Venus in Leo as well. So that could be about ourselves and our image and pride, perhaps wanting to feel good about ourselves, and perhaps some people are going to be focusing on appearance and grand gestures and not wanting to be ignored. So that is a way in which Venus in Leo can work. Though also when Venus moves into Leo, it does start making an opposition to Pluto, and so Venus opposition Pluto can be quite intense, and it can be quite possessive. So there is quite a lot going on. And additionally, one other thing, Venus is quintile Mars, and Venus quintile Mars perhaps ties in with Venus moving into Leo, because Venus Mars are two planets of attraction, and so when they're in a quintile aspect, it could be about trying to make an impression. We feel we want people to like us, we want people to be attracted to us, so we have to make a special effort to come over in the right way. And it's might be a bit forced, but sometimes it's worth making an effort, and particularly if you've got sorry, did I say biquintile? It's a quintile. So Venus and Mars, there's Venus, there's Mars. So they're 72 degrees apart, which is a quintile aspect. A biquintile is 144 degrees. So a quintile is 1/5 of a circle. So some of us will be trying very hard to be attractive and to get the right kind of attention. So turning to the picture for sort of Australia and New Zealand, so here's a chart set for Sydney, Australia. You can see that the moon is earlier, not just in the sign, but it's in the previous sign. So the moon is at 23 degrees Virgo at noon in Sydney, Australia. So that just tells us that all day the moon is going to be moving through late Virgo. So you won't get the Venus and Leo until tomorrow. And then there is the heliocentric view, putting the planets, or rather the sun, at the center of the solar system. And we have the beginnings of a Mercury-Venus conjunction. So Mercury at 6 Gemini, Venus at 10 Gemini. And remember, this is heliocentric Gemini. And so it's close enough to have an influence, and it is about certainly creating an image, but it's more than an image. It's about showing what we can do. And Mercury conjunct Venus is it's quite an artistic combination. And so in terms of art, if we have any artistic inclinations, where are we going to get our inspiration from? We can perhaps get our inspiration from the universe, from the entirety of the cosmos. And it's not just about us. Remember, this is a heliocentric conjunction. It's a very collective influence. And so if you're looking for artistic inspiration, it's not about you sort of racking your mind, trying to find something. It's out there. And something is trying to communicate with you. And so over the next couple of days, do try to take advantage of that Mercury conjunct Venus. I think there is a theory, isn't there, that was it the composer is it John Tavener? I don't know anything about him. I don't know anything about music, but I think he had a theory, a really interesting theory, that all the music ever created was there from the beginning. So it's not about people creating music or creating art. It's about discovering something that was always there from the beginning of time. So maybe that's a way of looking at this conjunction between Mercury and Venus. And aside from that, Mars is square Pluto, but it's getting a bit weak. I mean, it's 3 degrees from the square of Pluto, so there are always power issues of some kind. And so perhaps that Mars square Pluto might intensify it to some extent, but I don't think that aspect is a particularly big deal. So let me now turn to the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Monday, August the 25th, 2025. Aries, there is a lot going on today, and overall the day gets busier as it progresses, more and more things happening. The day starts with the moon in Virgo, and so moon in Virgo, not particularly interesting. I mean, it's not that Virgo isn't an interesting sign. It's just the moon has made all its aspects in Virgo, and it might not seem that anything is going on. Maybe you're just wrapping things up, but then the moon moves into Libra, and when the moon moves into Libra, it kind of depends where you are. If you're in the Americas, that will be this morning that the moon moves into Libra. If you're in Europe or Africa, that would be sometime in the afternoon, and perhaps late afternoon, depending on where you are in Africa. But so there is a sense in which the pace of the day really starts to increase. And when the moon moves into Libra, that is a change. When the moon was in Virgo, many Arians perhaps felt that they had to sort things out. There were things they had to do. It may not have been especially exciting. And then moon moves into Libra, you start to have to think about the social dimension, other people, what impact do other people have on you. And there is a question of how much control you have and how you deal with people. And yet that is an important question, because the moon, when it moves into Libra, makes an opposition to Saturn and also makes an opposition to Neptune. So there is a possibility that, with the moon making an opposition to Saturn, that you could be quite difficult. And we could see this happening, even before the moon moves into Libra, because late Virgo, the moon is getting closer and closer to that opposition of Saturn, and you have the ability to make other people feel nervous and self-conscious. Maybe they pick up on your capacity to be aggressive, at least verbally aggressive, and people are just unsure, quite how to behave. And that's especially the case if you're dealing with someone on a sort of one-to-one level. Usually things are fine, but there's something about you that might be difficult. So think very hard about how you are occurring to other people. And I think that's going to be important to you, because one aspect we do have throughout the day is a quintile between Venus and Mars. And of course that has an effect on you because Mars is your ruler. And so with this Venus quintile Mars, you are thinking about impressions, and you want to create the right impression, and you're able to make the right impression, even though the moon is making an opposition to Saturn. I mean, the moon opposition Saturn is quite a short-lived aspect. It might be around for a few hours. Venus quintile Mars is more fundamental, and it refers to the concept of attraction, how you try to attract, what you need to do to get people onto your side, how you can be charismatic. And because it's a quintile, it is the case that there are things that you can actively do to make yourself more appealing. So if you are trying to get anyone's attention, you definitely can make the right impression, but it's nothing very natural. You have to think about it, and it might seem rather contrived, but that's okay. So a bit of effort in the charisma department is almost certainly worth it. And at the same time, we have Venus moving into Leo, and Venus moving into Leo, it does perhaps say something about relationships and how you relate. I mean, Venus is a planet of relationships, and so when it moves into Leo, it's more forthcoming. Other people are more forthcoming. They perhaps want attention. Venus may say something about the people you're closest to, partners, spouses, those kind of people, and so with Venus moving into Leo, suddenly they perhaps want more attention, and they might be maybe sort of easier to offend if they're not given the praise they feel they deserve. But that's just the negative side of it. Venus moving into Leo does say something about your ability to get on with people, and in spite of that moon opposition Saturn, Venus moving into Leo allows you to be more creative in the way you express yourself, and you can be a fun person. And it's true that in certain quarters you could have come over as being a bit scary because of that moon opposition Saturn, but you have to go beyond it and really think about how you can manage the impression you are giving, because it does matter. It is all about impression. And Aries, through your conscious efforts, you can come over as a wonderful, exciting person, a warm person. Maybe not, but I don't think that it's necessary to be warm and sensitive today. Especially now that Venus is moving out of Cancer and moving into Leo. So overall, Aries, I think today is quite a bit about the impressions you are making, and you are being noticed, and you have to make sure that you create the right impressions. And I think looking at what's going on astrologically, it does seem that you really are able to do it. You're able to come over as someone who is appealing, and so just make a special effort to not to be too scary. Don't shout at someone if they make a mistake. Don't make people self-conscious. No, don't make people feel self-conscious, and try as hard as you can to put people at their ease. Taurus, Venus is changing sign, and that is important for you because Venus is your ruler. And so what's happening is that Venus is moving out of Cancer into Leo, and with Venus moving into Leo, it may be about what is important, where your focus might be. Now, for some Taurians, the focus might be on your home, where you live, what your home looks like, and you might realize that certain things don't look pleasant, need to be changed, and concepts of ugliness and beauty could start to take center stage. And so when you look at your living space, you will respond to it in an aesthetic way, and if it doesn't feel right, if it feels ugly or is just not as attractive as it should be, you will want to make changes. So that's one aspect of Venus moving into Leo, but it might say something just generally about you. With Venus moving into Leo, you might want to calm down, and concepts of security could become very important over the next few weeks, while Venus moves through this sign. You'll want to ground yourself, and you want to be sure that you really are safe. I mean, I don't really mean safe in a sort of a physical way, but just in an emotional way, just feeling right, feeling that you are in the right place, that nothing is going to compromise your psychological security. And you will have perhaps a tendency to err on the side of caution. You might not want to go out of your way to create big effects. You may become sort of more introverted than usual, and that's the right approach, I think. Things will change later on in the year. Venus is not going to be in Leo forever, but just over the next few weeks, it just might be a good idea to just make sure that everything is secure, and there are no unpleasant surprises waiting in the wings. Now, there is another aspect involving Venus, and that is a quintile between Venus and Mars. So Venus is 72 degrees from Mars, and this Venus-Mars quintile could say something about your various relationships and how they are managed. And there is a tendency to think that the way you relate to other people is almost out of your hands. There is an ebb and flow of relationships. Sometimes people get on very well, other times they just fall out with one another, and that's just the way it is. But this Venus-Mars quintile is about effort, and it's about what you can do to get on with other people. And it's telling you that if you get it right, if you make a special effort to come over as being sort of appealing and comforting and not rocking the boat, it can make a big difference. So if you want to get on with people, you can. And also with Venus quintile Mars, you might have an idea about how you want to relate to another person. Maybe you want to relate to them in quite an aggressive way. I mean, who knows? What kind of relationship do you want? And that is a question you have to ask yourself. And so if you decide that there is someone important and you want to relate to them in a particular way, then you can create a plan. I know there's not supposed to be a plan. I know relationships are supposed to be natural. It's supposed to be natural and spontaneous, but not with the quintile. And so you can create something, with your conscious mind, and that can have, a big impact on the way relationships work. Venus quintile Mars is also about attraction and how you attract. And again, attractiveness is often seen as something very spontaneous, but when you've got Venus quintile Mars, you can take active steps to make yourself more attractive. You can plan, you can perhaps think about the people you need to attract, and think about what you need to say, what you need to wear, what you need to do. So when it comes to other people, particularly on a one-to-one level, there is scope here for a lot of planning. Gemini. Unfortunately, Gemini, Mercury is making a sesquiquadrate to Saturn. It's also making a sesquiquadrate to Neptune. And this may say quite a lot about the way you feel. And we have got a Saturn-Neptune conjunction. I've been going on and on about this Saturn-Neptune conjunction, and I do think that this Saturn-Neptune conjunction is quite difficult. There's a lot of fear there. Saturn is about trying to create some kind of structure, but Neptune is always trying to overwhelm the structure in a very sort of subtle way. And so, that does create fear and uncertainty. We don't really know quite where things are going. And, it's not just a Gemini thing. It relates to all of us. And so with Mercury making a sesquiquadrate to Saturn, there may be things just holding you back. You'd like to do things, but you can't. And it's possible that other people, for example, your friends or your colleagues, are not very supportive. They come up with reasons why you can't do things, or it may just be about their personalities and the way they present themselves, they are holding you back, they're holding you up. And so that's something that you maybe need to be aware of. And if you find yourself having negative thoughts today, I mean, don't forget, I'm a Gemini too, and I think I'm already beginning to feel this Mercury sesquiquadrate Saturn. Because Mercury is about not just the way you communicate, but it's also about the way you think, and so I'll perhaps talk about that in a moment. But the thing is that with Mercury sesquiquadrate Saturn, there just may be moments where, you feel negative and you feel that there is no way around it, that you're stuck. You'd like to be doing things, you'd like to have possibilities, but as far as you're concerned, there are no possibilities. It's all a waste of time. That's Mercury sesquiquadrate Saturn, and it's a passing aspect. So if you do find yourself feeling, incredibly negative, then don't worry about it. It's completely explainable by Mercury sesquiquadrate Saturn and even Mercury sesquiquadrate Neptune. And indeed, there might be fears. You might be worried that if you do something or you say something, there could be negative implications. So that is a real possibility. And I am thinking about this Mercury sesquiquadrate Saturn, and it's already starting to impact me. Am I being more negative than usual? Well, possibly. When I started doing this video, I couldn't get the words out. The first words, when I sort of, this is talking astrology with Archie and all this kind of stuff, I kept having to repeat myself. I had to do about 15 takes because I got my words jumbled up and I got my facts mixed up and I didn't know what I was talking about. And that is Mercury sesquiquadrate Saturn, and Mercury is the communication planet. And so if it's sesquiquadrate Saturn, something is just stopping the words coming out. And also with Mercury sesquiquadrate Neptune, you have an issue with getting confused, and check your facts. So, be very careful about what you say. And, later in this video, we'll be talking about Lucy Connolly and her tweets and her tweet, which got her into prison. And so you could argue that that's a bit of a Mercury sesquiquadrate Saturn thing. So be careful what you say and be careful what you tweet and what you put on social media, because it will be up there forever. I'm not saying it's going to get you into prison, but you could just say something that you haven't really thought through, and Neptune can just mean that you get confused. You thought you understood something, and then after the event you realize you don't understand it at all, and you've got your facts mixed up, and that would be unfortunate. So I'm sorry so far to have been rather negative. I mean, it's not all bad. I mean, Venus is moving into Leo, out of Cancer into Leo, and Venus moving into Leo from a Gemini perspective, isn't such a bad thing. Venus moving into Leo. Well, Leo is a sign that has a sympathy with Gemini, and with Venus in Leo, you're going to find it perhaps easier to get on with people. Okay, maybe not today or tomorrow, but Venus is going to be in Leo for a few weeks, and so while Venus progresses through Leo, you should find that it's relatively easy to to get on with people and to get the attention you deserve. But also do consider other people's egos, because you could say that Venus in Leo is about you communicating with another person, and you taking into account their fragile ego. And if you use a lot of flattery, then I think that you could be very effective. Geminis are quite good at flattery. I mean, maybe not me, but some Geminis are, if they think about it. Geminis can say anything, I mean, maybe I'm not a typical Gemini in this sense, but some Geminis, whatever needs to be said, they'll say it. And if you want to make someone feel happy, if you want to tell someone that they're wonderful, then, feel free. Cancer. The moon is moving into Libra, and with the moon moving into Libra, that is probably a relief. And the reason it might be a relief is because you've had moon in Virgo, and the moon was in the same sign as the sun, and as a result of that, the moon just could have felt itself to be a bit burnt out in the same sign as the sun. The new moon is great, beginning of a new lunar cycle, so we've got that. But right at the beginning of a lunar cycle, things can be exhausting if you're a Cancerian. As a Cancerian, you are very sensitive to the way the lunation pans out. And so maybe when the moon moves into Libra, things start to calm down, and you start to have a degree of objectivity. You can see things in a clear way. And so that's one sort of fortunate side of the moon moving into Libra. And perhaps the best way of handling the moon moving into Libra is to do things your way, to make sure that you are in a protected environment. This is what happens when the moon moves into Libra, and also there is going to be a time when the moon in Libra is in mutual reception to Venus, because the moon is in Libra, which is in Venus's sign. Venus is in Cancer, which is the moon sign. So we've got this moon Venus mutual reception, and that's a great aspect to have. Well, it's not an aspect; it's a relationship. Although the moon is sextile Venus, so we've got moon sextile Venus in mutual reception. So that gives you the opportunity to feel very comfortable about everything, while that mutual reception is in operation, and that mutual reception is in operation the moment the moon moves into Libra. That could be this morning in the Americas, this afternoon if you're in Europe, or sort of very late in the day and into tomorrow if you're in Australia or New Zealand. So it kind of depends where you are, but there will be moments of great comfort and feeling that you are in the right place, even though you're very aware of troublesome influences, because the problem is that the moon does make an opposition to Saturn. And the question then is, do you have to get upset by that moon opposition Saturn? Okay, I'm not saying you have to get upset by anything, but do you have to be bothered by that moon opposition Saturn? And that moon opposition Saturn could be about pressure from the outside. Something that you don't want to deal with is trying to get your attention. And as soon as you give in and as you give it your attention, then the problems might start. And so if you are going into work today, then that moon opposition Saturn could start to manifest, and it's not great, and you and authority figures may not see eye to eye. So perhaps you should avoid situations where you're getting too close to someone who is an authority figure, who has control over you, who might be your boss, someone you perhaps have a respect for. That kind of person could create difficulties. Although that moon opposition Saturn, it could relate to your mother, if your mother is still around, or even if she's not around, it just could relate to the influence of the mother. So there is a sort of a psychological level to that moon opposition Saturn, and there's a relationship level as well, moon opposition Saturn. And if you are in a relationship with another person with moon opposition Saturn, there may be moments today where you just don't get on with them, where there is a misunderstanding, or you have different priorities compared to to another person. So maybe relationships should be de-emphasized, particularly if there have been recent problems, and because we do have a rather contradictory situation. The moon is in mutual reception to Venus, and so the right relationship can work out extremely well, but the wrong relationship could be a real drag. It could be something that could wreck your day in certain situations. But it's all unnecessary. And just remember, Cancer, you have a choice, and what matters most of all is that you just protect yourself, and you're in a secure environment, and it's all there for you. And so look after yourself. And Cancerians are very good at looking after themselves, so there shouldn't really be a problem in that department. Leo, Venus is moving into your sign, and that I would regard as being pretty good news. I mean, Venus is a fortunate planet, and so when Venus moves into Leo, you should find that things do start working for you, especially on an interpersonal level, because when Venus is in Leo, that says something about how you can present yourself, and how you get on with people, and you will know how to present yourself, and you'll come over as being a warm and sympathetic person. And also the issue of praise could be important, and it works both ways. You will be very good at heaping praise on other people, and it can be a very effective strategy of praising people. Even if you don't consider them to be especially praiseworthy, just by saying a few nice things, it can make all the difference. On the other hand, with Venus moving into Leo, you yourself might have a demand for praise. You might feel that people should say wonderful things about you, and if you're doing something, you want to be told that you're doing a good job. But there's no need to expect praise. It is unnecessary. It's not going to change anything. I mean, I think you will get more praise than usual, but at the same time, you're going to be more demanding of praise. So that could be a problem. So don't regard praise as being important. And if you feel there isn't enough praise around, if you feel that you're not getting enough praise and appreciation, then reverse it. Start heaping praise on other people. And it may just work in a sort of weird way that the more you praise other people, the more they'll praise you. Well, okay, we don't want it to end up as a mutual admiration society. But if there's something you want from other people, then first of all, you should perhaps be prepared to give it out yourself. Now, as far as close relationships are concerned, I'm not entirely confident that it's going to be a great day. And the reason is that there is a sesquiquadrate between Mercury and Saturn. And, with this sesquiquadrate between Mercury and Saturn, it's possible that some people are either not saying much, they're just keeping themselves to themselves, you don't know what they're thinking, or they're kind of going the opposite, and they are saying things which could be quite caustic and unpleasant. People say things without thinking it through, and because they're annoyed, maybe because they're frustrated. So that's how the Mercury sesquiquadrate Saturn could work. So don't get offended if anyone says something that isn't very nice, and also don't get upset if someone is saying nothing, because Mercury sesquiquadrate Saturn for certain people may be about just not knowing what to say, and if nothing is said, you really shouldn't be taking it to heart, and you don't feel that you always have to be saying something. And another aspect we've got the moon moving into Libra, And Moon moving into Libra, on the face of it, is quite a communicative, verbal thing to happen. But the trouble is that when the Moon moves into Libra, it makes an opposition to Saturn. And that Moon opposition Saturn could be about the desire to say something, but it's just not reciprocated. Whatever you want to say, there may not be a willing audience, or rather, the people who you thought were going to appreciate your words of wisdom or your random comments, they won't appreciate it at all. And so there may be moments in a day where you just feel that you can't say anything, that you're stuck. But I would urge you not to panic, and just accept that these things do take their time, and you have to get your moment right. And before you say anything, you have to understand what is perhaps bothering people. But if you have that sensitivity, then it should be okay. I mean, I think that there is a general level of sort of social action going on today. Things are happening. There are people to converse with, but just maybe conversation is not going to be at a very deep level, and perhaps it's better, if you want to spend time with people, that you spend time with people you don't necessarily know very well. Maybe it's a good time to just introduce yourself, but not to take anything too far. And so that's a way of handling today. I think that it is a beginning as well. Venus moving into Leo, you know that things are changing. That with Venus moving into Leo, you can come over as being a powerful person, as someone who knows how to make people feel good about themselves. It may not be particularly apparent today, but as Venus gathers strength in Leo, then you will see things change. So yeah, it's a new beginning, and things are going to get better, especially on a social level. Virgo, Mercury, it could be a problem today, and Mercury is of course your ruling planet, and Mercury is still in Leo, and it's therefore in a part of your chart which is fairly isolated. At the moment, many Virgos do not want to be center stage. They don't want too much attention. They just want to be doing things their own way, and they don't want too much pressure. And Mercury, Mercury making a sesquiquadrate to Saturn could create a level of negativity that maybe you weren't expecting. Suddenly you might find yourself thinking that something is hopeless, that there is no point, that it is going absolutely nowhere. And so what is the point in trying? And this negativity could get out of control a bit. But you have to remember, if you do have these negative thoughts, if you start to think that everything is going nowhere, but it is about Mercury making a sesquiquadrate to Saturn. It's just Saturn weighing in on you. And Saturn could encourage you to overthink things, especially as Saturn is conjunct Neptune. So Saturn and Neptune, for all of us, regardless of our sign, is quite a sort of a destabilizing influence. And, we don't know what's happening. We're not sure of anything. We're not even sure of the ground on which we're standing. And so with Mercury sesquiquadrate Saturn and Neptune, it just may seem that nothing is going on, nothing is possible, and there could also be a feeling of, exaggeration. One negative thought leads to another negative thought. So, why am I telling you all this? Am I just trying to make you miserable? No, not really. What I'm trying to tell you is that if you feel negative about anything, it can be tied to the astrology. And as it can be tied to the astrology, it has an end date. We can see how it's going to run through, and by tomorrow you're going to be feeling a whole lot better. So there is good news there. And this Saturn Neptune thing is, it just can't be avoided. And perhaps, Virgo, what's happening is that you are experiencing what everyone else is experiencing, because this Saturn Neptune conjunction, as I said, it affects all of us, but you're experiencing it in a sort of a hyper way. You can see the issues. You can see why no one knows what's going on. You can see the confusion under the surface, and you're aware of it all. And the key perhaps is not to make it personal. It's not personal. It's just what you're seeing, and perhaps that gives you an advantage. And perhaps you can verbalize things which other people feel they just can't deal with. And so maybe that's the way around it, And it may actually be an opportunity, because if you can verbalize things which other people can't, then you can start doing things about it, and you can start protecting yourself, and also perhaps seeing opportunities. We see Saturn-Neptune conjunction as being, a bad thing. I mean, it is a pretty malefic conjunction, but it does create opportunities, and it's a reminder that things are going to change, society is going to change, and that means that you can perhaps put yourself in a position where you should be able to take advantage of it. And also, Virgo, don't forget that we had a new moon over the weekend, and the sun and moon obviously both went into Virgo. Okay, the moon is now leaving Virgo, but today, Monday, is that first day when you realize the sun is in your sign. And so with the sun in your sign, you have a chance to create something, and it's a beginning of a process of creation, especially as the sun is square Uranus. So you had the sun square Uranus over the weekend. That square is still there, and it's a very dynamic square. And so, Virgo, you may be able to take a situation which seems difficult as if it's really going nowhere, and you can change everything. And through your efforts, and perhaps also through your inspiration, you can take a complicated situation, a situation that seems to be rather negative as well, and you can turn it around. And perhaps it's all about having a moment of inspiration where you really start to see what is necessary and what can be done. Libra. Venus is your ruler, and Venus is changing sign. So this is, I think, something good, having Venus in Leo, and Venus will be in Leo for some time. And so with Venus in Leo, it is a time, overall, when many Librans are perhaps going to be more sociable than usual. You can get on with other people at many different levels, and with Venus in Leo, you are going to be quite good at heaping the praise on others if need be, and that's perhaps quite a Libran thing. I mean, Libra as a sign had a reputation for being fairly manipulative. Manipulation, there's nothing wrong with manipulation, by the way. And if you want to get something done, you have to get people on your side. And how do you get people on your side? Well, you might want to praise them. You might want to tell them how wonderful they are. I mean, praise, does matter. We are living in difficult times, and some people are just wondering whether there's any point in anything, and they might feel alone. And if someone like you comes along and tells them how wonderful they are, then they're going to respond very well to it. I mean, we all like praise, don't we? And so by giving praise, you really are improving the situation. And even if you feel that the praise isn't really earned or deserved, it's still worth the effort. And you don't necessarily just have to praise. It's all about making another person feel special. And that can just be about taking an interest in what they're doing. that doesn't require any praise, and that's how Venus in Leo can work for you. So be curious, show your curiosity, ask people questions which allow them to express their views, and to not just express their views, but tell you what they're interested in, what matters for them. And so by taking into account other people, I think that you're really going to be just making things easier for yourself. I mean, you'll also be creating a pleasant atmosphere. And at the same time, the moon is moving into your sign. And so, moon moves into your sign. Well, moves into your sign this morning if you're in the Americas, this afternoon if you're in Europe or Africa, and very late in the day into tomorrow perhaps if you're in Australia or New Zealand. But it's getting there. And so that's good that the moon is moving into your sign. You're feeling more real. You feel that you've arrived, that you can be more definite. The trouble is that the moon, when it moves into Libra, it straight away makes an opposition to Saturn. So there is this moon opposition Saturn today, which is across the main axis of your chart. And so moon opposition Saturn possibly indicates that certain relationships could be problematic. And it may be a situation where the more you know someone, the greater the problem. So if you know someone really, really well, then that moon opposition Saturn could create problems. Maybe you'll have to spend too much time worrying about another person, and it could take up all your time. And the more you know them, the easier it is for them to demand your attention. On the other hand, if you deal with people on a more sort of general level, when I talked about Venus moving into Leo, if you can be with people who you don't know that well, you know them a bit, but you don't really you don't really find yourself in a situation where there is some really strong emotional bond where you can manipulate each other, where it's not like that. You don't want that. So try to avoid close relationships, I think, with this moon opposition Saturn, especially if there have been recent difficulties, because the wrong person could wreck your day, particularly if you're not properly prepared. Although Saturn is in Aries. Okay, Saturn does leave Aries quite soon, goes back into Pisces. I think it's in a few weeks' time. And so perhaps, when Saturn leaves Aries, that will take some of the pressure off. But, Saturn is going to go back into Aries. And so with this moon opposition Saturn, if one tries to be constructive about it, you may be placed in a situation where you see how you and another person relate to one another. And you can see the problems, but you can also see the lessons, and you can see what you need to do in future to behave in a way that allows you to find your freedom, and at the same time to have the right level of respect for another person. People need respect, but you can't give them too much respect. So with that moon opposition Saturn, there's just a danger that you get involved in something regarding another person which is just sort of too complicated, and it just goes on, and you probably don't want that to happen. So best thing to do is just keep things simple, and to make sure that you've got plenty of space, and that if when you do talk to people, that you're talking to people that you don't know that well, because if you know someone too well, that's when the problems could start to manifest. Scorpio. It is, I think, good news that Venus is moving into Leo. It means that you can be very effective. You can present yourself very well. and you can present who you are and what's important to you, and you can just get respect. And so if you're working today, or if you've got any sort of ambitions that you're pushing forward then I think this Venus in Leo is really going to help you. And with Venus in Leo, inevitably, I think you're going to be thinking about how you come across, and appearance may be very important to you. And to be honest, Venus in Leo can indicate a degree of vanity. I know that vanity has got sort of negative connotations, but all of us have some degree of vanity. And so if you find yourself being vainer than usual, don't worry about it. You may want to just make sure that you're looking good. And with Venus in Leo, that's something you very much can do. Especially as Venus is making a quintile to Mars. So, quintile is about what you're consciously trying to create. And Venus and Mars as a pair is about attractiveness. So Scorpio, if you want to be attractive, if you want to look your best, if you want to get a lot of attention and praise, feel free. I think you're going to be very good today at just creating the right image. And you know what needs to be done. You're a Scorpio. You're sensitive enough to know what kind of image you need to create for yourself. So that looks good. And so if you can do whatever you can to push forward with your agenda, again, whatever your agenda is, I think that you will be really very successful. But that things can change very quickly. You can get very close to someone and it's all working well, and then something happens, and you're aware that attraction and repulsion are they're very much part of the same thing. And if you get too attracted to something, then you can actually get the opposite. And so that might mean that regarding other people, that you don't want to spend too much time with another person, because if you do that, in the end you will start to see the other side, and you'll start to realize that the person you started being with, you thought they were great, and then they just say the wrong thing, or they reveal a side to their personality that makes you have second thoughts. So perhaps, Scorpio, under those circumstances, you shouldn't spend too long with any one person, because the longer you spend with them, the greater the possibility that something does go wrong, that something gets revealed. And it could work both ways. It could be them revealing something, could be you revealing something, and that might spoil the magic. Though you could say it's always good to know the truth, and if you spend long enough with anyone, you'll start to see who they really are. And when you start to see who someone really is, straight away you might have second thoughts. But perhaps you have to be tolerant. You have to realize that everyone has got their dark side. Everyone has got aspects of their personality which are unpleasant, and you just have to accept that. And Scorpios can do that, because Scorpios can be quite realistic about other people. They know that no one is perfect. They know that they themselves aren't perfect as well. So it's a question of how far do you want to take something. But I don't want to make today sound too complicated. I think that the most important thing is that Venus is moving into Leo, and I think that Venus in Leo, over the next few weeks is going to be really good for you, and it's going to really help you show the world what you can do. And yeah, you're going to want praise, but you're going to be able to do things which attract praise, and people will notice you. And okay, not every Scorpio wants to be noticed, but sometimes it's necessary to be noticed. I mean, if you don't get noticed, then people don't know what you're trying to do, then they don't know what you're trying to achieve, and you don't get the help when it's really necessary. So, don't be afraid of telling people who you are and what you can do. Sagittarius. At the moment, Sagittarius, you may be slightly concerned about other people. Not everyone is going to match your expectations. And this is a problem that a lot of people are having, and it's not just a Sagittarius thing. So I mean, don't worry about it. Don't feel that you're being singled out, but you might be just disappointed by other people's responses, other people's reactions. They might seem slow. That's one possibility. You expected someone to be more dynamic, and if you're honest with yourself, they're really not very impressive, or they appear not to be very impressive. You certainly shouldn't judge anyone by what you see today, because some people are slow and sluggish, and they might even seem a bit dim, and that might not necessarily be who they are. So that's one thing that could be happening. That's one sort of manifestation of today. And additionally, people can make mistakes, and they could have serious misunderstandings. So if you're told something, don't necessarily believe it. It might just be wrong. Someone might be confused, and so nothing can be taken at face value. And so that means that ideally you would look after yourself, and you would make sure that the one person you can trust is you. So you can trust yourself, that's for sure. But still, there is this temptation to get involved with people. You might feel that it's the right thing to do, and that may have something to do with the fact that the moon is changing sign. The moon is moving out of Virgo into Libra, but the trouble is, when the moon moves into Libra, it makes it makes an opposition to Saturn, and that opposition to Saturn may be just disappointing, and you just see that just some people just aren't up to scratch, and so be ready to do everything yourself. And if you take that approach, then it's not a problem. And also, Sagittarius, do not have firm ideas about what you're going to be able to do today. So you might think that that there are things you're going to achieve by the end of the day, and if you have that approach, you just could be disappointed. It's just going to be that everything is hard work, and there's a possibility that you make a mistake. You assume you have to do something. You think you know how to do it, and you start moving forward. You feel you've got it under control. Then you realize you've got something wrong, and you have to start again. And so, don't try to take on too much. Really, perhaps have some single goal for today, and really think about it, really prepare it. Don't assume that you know anything. Just start from first principles, take it slowly, and be satisfied with really very small gains, and don't allow yourself to be put off. And don't also, this is very important, don't think that what happens today is going to be typical of the next few weeks. It's not. The sun is making a square to Uranus, and the sun in Virgo is making a square to Uranus, and we've just had a new moon. Now, if you were listening to what I was saying about the new moon, I think overall this is a really good new moon for Sagittarians. It really does allow you to concentrate on what is important, and over the next few weeks I'm really confident that you can sort of move forward with whatever your ambitions might be. But it's just that right now there could be disappointments and there could be disruptions, and other people might not be particularly helpful. So Monday today is not typical, and it just may be a case that all's well that ends well. Well, it starts badly. So just because something starts badly, it doesn't mean that it ends badly. It just might be slower than usual. And so be patient, and don't get upset if things don't work out to begin with. They will in the end. And also stay in control, and perhaps there may be a moment when you can change everything. And that is because of this aspect, which I've already talked about, is the fact that Jupiter remains on the Sun-Uranus midpoint. So Jupiter is still making a semi-square to the Sun. Jupiter is still making a semi-square to Uranus. So Jupiter is still on the Sun-Uranus midpoint. And so if you're in a situation where it feels that nothing is going on, nothing is happening, you're not getting any support, with Jupiter on the Sun-Uranus midpoint, you can perhaps change everything. I mean, just to give you an idea, let's see what Reinhold Ebertin says, just to maybe hopefully cheer you up. Jupiter on the Sun-Uranus midpoint. He says, Jupiter on the Sun-Uranus midpoint. He says, a successful reformer, inventor or technician, good cognition and understanding, a pleasant surprise creating joy. So, take that on board. It may be that when things really aren't going your way, when you feel that it's all a bit of a disaster, something happens. You get inspired. I'm not saying that there's going to be some amazing event from the outside, but it just might be about what you feel, and suddenly you understand things, and you then realize that whatever's happening today, it's not typical of the next few weeks. This is just a difficult beginning, and all of a sudden you can see the future, and the future looks good. Capricorn. It's good that the Sun is now in Virgo. I mean, that's a sort of a bit of a generalization, isn't it? But from a Capricorn perspective, having the Sun in Virgo, and this has been a beginning of a week, and you realize that the Sun is no longer in Leo, it's in Virgo, and this is a time, when Capricorns can, start to, think about the future. Perhaps in the recent past, it had perhaps been difficult to think about the future. There were other things that you were tied up in. You were trying to make sense of it, and you were perhaps sort of agonizing. But now the sun is in Virgo. You can see the possibilities, and you can see that things are moving your way. And additionally, you realize that you haven't got all the answers. And this is a time of year when Capricorns can learn new stuff, and so late August into September, there's information that is just waiting for you to take advantage, waiting for you to take advantage of it. So don't feel you know everything, and perhaps you can brush up on skills, brush up on knowledge. It's just going to make things just so much easier for you. And additionally, we have the moon moving into Libra. Sometime over the course of the day, the moon moves into Libra, and so with the moon moving into Libra, it is challenging, but possibly challenging in a good way. Yeah, it's true that the moon is making an opposition to Saturn, but with the moon moving to an opposition to Saturn, I think that this is just telling you that something has changed. You're assuming that things are going to be, like they used to be, and like they used to be in a fairly negative way. You're thinking that, it's all just more of the same, but it's not more of the same. And the moon moving into Libra should be, quite inspiring for you. And it is true that the moon is making an opposition to Saturn, and that might sound difficult, but the moon is also making a conjunction to Mars, and the moon-Mars conjunction, over the next day or two, or perhaps over the next 24 hours, it's going to give you a new sense of dynamism and what can be done. And from your perspective, you might feel that you just want to just stay where you are. You don't want to do anything. You don't want to take risks. But yeah, it is a challenge, and you are being challenged to move forward. And I think that this is a challenge you should really take on board. Now, as far as relationships are concerned, if you have been listening to what I've been saying about the 12 signs, I, generally speaking, have not been very positive about relationships. And so it's not that I'm kind of singling you out, but there is this moon opposition Saturn, and moon opposition Saturn can indicate that you and another person have a different view. I mean, you could say that one always might say that when moon is opposition Saturn, but this time around, Saturn is very close to the cardinal point. It's getting very close to 0 degrees Aries, getting ready to move into Pisces. The moon is just at 0 degrees Libra, and so the incompatibilities, if there are any incompatibilities between you and another person, they're very close to the surface, and perhaps you don't want to get involved with them. And so maybe relationships are an area that you do want to treat with caution, and so don't feel that relationships need to be an essential part of the day. But if you do get involved with someone, you've got to be very serious and constructive about it, and it's probably a good idea not to make too many assumptions. Aquarius. Venus is moving into Leo, which is your opposite sign. And Venus is the planet of relationships, so with Venus making this sign change, it's possible that relationships do become sort of more important, that you have to pay attention to other people and what they're doing. And Venus moving into Leo, may say something about other people's behavior. Perhaps a new person is turning up, someone you hadn't been aware of in the past, and they're suddenly right in front of you. And in general, you have to think about other people, and you've already had the Sun moving through Leo and Mercury moving through Leo. I know that the Sun is sort of out of Leo, and it's just moved into Virgo. But with Mercury and Venus moving through Leo, you've just got to consider the other. And I think that you need perhaps to not make too many assumptions with Venus in Leo, because you are being asked to look at things from an objective perspective. It's not about you. It's about another person and how another person is behaving and what they want and what they expect. And additionally, Venus is a benefic, and it could be that with Venus moving into Leo, you have an opportunity to benefit from another person. There is something they can offer, and at first you might not appreciate this. I mean, after all, when Venus moves into Leo, it makes an opposition to Pluto, and so Venus opposition Pluto could make you quite suspicious over the next couple of days. If anyone is around, gets too close to you, you may be wondering, what do they want? And you might assume the worst. Maybe you're right to assume the worst. It depends. But I think that in most cases, you should, at the very least, give people a chance, and at the same time, don't allow your own sort of negativity to spoil things. And when I'm talking about your negativity, I'm not just talking about relationships. I'm talking about the way you feel, the the way you think. And an aspect that we do have today is a sesquiquadrate between Mercury and Saturn. And so Mercury sesquiquadrate Saturn, is an aspect which is about the way you talk, and the way you think. And so with Mercury sesquiquadrate Saturn, you may be holding something back, and you may not want to say things. Perhaps you're worried about revealing too much about yourself, and so that would be a shame, because I do think that you have got something to offer, that you've definitely got something important to say that other people could benefit from. But the question is, are you going to hold back? And I would suggest that you ask yourself why you might be holding back. It just might be your own fears. It's just something you're bothered about, which in its own way could be quite irrational, and it just may prevent you from making the most of things. And there are things to take advantage of. I've already said that there are people out there who can work in your favour, I do think, and it might be quite surprising. You might not think that someone is useful, but they could be. And additionally, with the moon moving into Libra, it does make a grand trine in air signs. So we've got the moon in Libra making a trine to Pluto, making a trine to Uranus. So when there's a grand trine in air signs, well, that should be a good thing for you, Aquarius. Things can move, and they perhaps can move unexpectedly. So you might start the day thinking that nothing much is going on, and being perhaps quite negative. But when the moon moves into Libra, there's a chance to switch things around, to suddenly see the possibilities. See all the reasons why these possibilities might not work. It's just nothing wrong with being realistic, but you can see the possibilities, but also structure them, and perhaps take advantage of this formation we have, which is a kite. So we've got a kite. When I say a kite, we've got a grand trine between Moon, Uranus and Pluto, but then Saturn is opposition the Moon. And this kite can work in your favour, not least because Saturn is your ruler. So you have a chance to take something which is full of opportunity, but which might be chaotic, might be just full of vague ideas, and you can take it and you can ground it and you can make it real, and you can sort of communicate it. And so Aquarius, you have to cut through the negativity and see the opportunities and see the possibilities, and in that way you can have a Monday which could be very useful, and it could be a pointer to future gains. Pisces, the moon is about to change sign. At some stage it will change sign, and the moon will move out of Virgo and into Libra. And that might mean that you have to start to see things in a different way. And perhaps you had assumed that other people were telling the truth. You'd taken what they said at face value, maybe, and that seemed okay. And then with the moon moving into Libra, you perhaps start to have your doubts. And when the moon moves into Libra, it does make an opposition to Saturn. And it's good to have doubts. And it's good to just think again about what you've been told, and to think again about the assumptions you've made. And just because you have been misled does not mean to say that it's anyone's fault. You may have misled yourself, and you have perhaps taken what someone said at face value. Maybe something was not meant to be said at face value, but you took it at face value. And now you're starting to realize that things aren't quite as simple as you thought they were, and you have to start to think for yourself. So that's one thing going on. And there might be moments of revelation today, and we can see the revelation by looking at Jupiter. Jupiter is your ruler, and Jupiter is on the Sun-Uranus midpoint. It was on the Sun-Uranus midpoint over the weekend, but Jupiter is making a semi-square to the Sun. It's making a semi-square to Uranus, and so with Jupiter on the Sun-Uranus midpoint, you can see the possibilities, and you can be inspired, and you can be free. So if something is holding you back, then you can release the chains, and you can by and large do what you want. And one thing holding you back, as I've already said, could be your false assumptions. You'd assumed that something was right, was correct, you'd believe someone, but now everything has changed, and perhaps that has something to do with the new moon over the weekend. So we had a new moon in Virgo. I think it's on Saturday, in your opposite sign, and this new moon, well, it represented a new beginning as far as relationships are concerned, and new beginnings are always good, but new beginnings can be difficult to manage. Remember that new moon was square Uranus, and so this new moon may be about having an understanding of other people, or indeed certain other people, which may be at first quite alarming. You see what people are really like, what they're capable of doing, and you perhaps understand them for the first time, and knowledge should be welcomed. And because you understand something, you're able to make your own decisions. And so it is a time, Pisces, when you can really find your freedom. And at first that might seem a bit scary, but it is all for the best. So those are my forecasts for the 12 signs, and now I want to turn to the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Monday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 8, which is holding together. And this is a very social hexagram, as you can see, holding together. It's about people coming together, people having particular interests, and they are all coming together. And so if there's something you want to do, something you want to advance, then it might be better to do it with other people rather than on your own. And it's very important that you are sincere. You are very clear about who you are. This is not a time for playing games or pretending to be someone you're not. It's just about being absolutely honest. Some people are going to like you, other people are not, but if you have integrity, that will be appreciated. So that should be your general stance, coming into Monday. Now, holding together might also be about bringing together, all of your attributes, all of the resources you have, and so it doesn't necessarily need to be about other people. It's about holding firm and realizing that you have got what it takes to be successful, or indeed, if you're dealing with an obstacle, something that seems to be holding you up, you have what it takes to get through that obstacle. Or even if there's a threat, with holding together, you and other people can stand up against its threat. And again, if other people are not involved, you have got what it takes. You've got the resources, and that's what the I Ching is telling you. You have the resources to get through this. And they're probably social resources, but if you can't think of any social resources, there are other resources that you can bring into play. And the fifth line moves. The two lines move, actually. The bottom line moves and the fifth line moves. And the fifth line The I Ching talks about hunting animals and how you should hunt animals. And it says that in traditional China, I don't know what kind of time the I Ching is talking about, you trap the animals on three sides. You kind of got a square formation, but you leave the fourth side open. I think that's how it works. And that way the animals have an opportunity to escape. And so why would you do that? You've got to give people a chance. So it's not a situation where an animal is inevitably going to be hunted down and killed. It has a chance. You're giving it a chance. And, that's what this fifth line is about. So I'm not advocating that you go hunting. I certainly wouldn't, being a vegetarian. But it's more about perhaps how you deal with other people. It's not about seeking other people and demanding that other people pay you attention, give you what you need, or regarding other people as being so essential that you can't let go of them. The people you're dealing with, you've got to give them a chance to escape. You've got to give them a chance to think, oh, they don't really want to bother with you. If you're not their kind of person, don't push it. You want people around you who you can trust, who are going to be with you through thick and thin. Therefore, it's very important that you give them a chance to escape. If you give them the opportunity to do something else, to accept that you aren't their kind of person, or that they don't have the kind of commitment that you are perhaps looking for. And so that way you can create the right social atmosphere for you, because you only want people you can trust. You don't want people who are flakes around you at the moment. And we've got two moving lines, so that means we move to a different hexagram. And the hexagram we move to is hexagram number 24, which is return. And perhaps looking at the previous hexagram, what you've been really trying to do is return to normal. That's what you really wanted. So you perhaps start the day feeling that it is a difficult situation. It's a situation where you need help, where you need support, where you perhaps need advice, and what you want is just to return perhaps to the status quo ante bellum. Before everything got difficult, you just want to go back to how it was. And with this hexagram 24, I think that's what you can do. And so you've gone as far as you can. You know what it's like. You know what challenges are there. You know what the pitfalls are. You know that if you go much further, things could go wrong. So you just return. And once you've returned, it's not about cowardice. It's about being realistic and knowing who you are, what your resources are, and what you can get away with. And you took things as far as you could, and now you're returning, and things are returning to normal, or things can return to normal, and that looks pretty good. And I want to finish with the horoscope of Lucy Connolly. Lucy Connolly, as I said at the beginning, she is a major news story in the UK. I mean, it seems to be huge. And so it all started with the stabbings in Southport. So it happened on July the 29th, 2024. There was a teenager. I think he was born in Wales, but his parents came from Africa, and I think he'd been radicalized. I think in a sort of Islamic way. I think, if I've got this right, and he went into this workshop, which was a Taylor Swift themed workshop with dance and yoga, and he went on a sort of a stabbing. He went into a stabbing frenzy, and it seemed to be a very planned thing that he did, and 3 young girls, really young. One was 6, another was 9, I think, and were killed, and so this was a major event, and the assumption was that this was perhaps an immigrant. And I mean, he wasn't an immigrant because he was born in the UK, but still, the country was very much was very tense, and this woman Lucy Connolly, she tweeted in response to this, and so her tweet was quite radical. So, I mean, quite radical is not quite the word. It was extreme, and it was ill-advised. And she talked about setting fire to the hotels. For all I care. I mean, I don't think she wasn't telling people to set fire to hotels. These were hotels housing immigrants. And it wasn't really an issue about hotels and immigrants, this particular event, though it wasn't clear at the time. It was someone who was born in the UK, and so it seemed to be an incitement to violence. And so she took down the tweet pretty quickly, but it was too late. People had screenshots, and in the end, she got arrested and she pleaded guilty. There was a question of whether or not she should have pleaded guilty, but she just wanted to get the whole thing out of the way. And then she was sent to prison for 3 years, but then she got out after 10 months. And she's been interviewed on TV, and she's very articulate. And I think her husband is a conservative counsellor, so she already had something of a political background, I would say. And it's really a very difficult situation for the government, and there is an issue about there's always an issue about immigration, and the country spending millions of billions on housing immigrants, and additionally, there is a free speech issue. So as far as she is concerned, here is her horoscope. Now, I don't know when she was born. I know what date she was born, because the Crown Prosecution Service gave her date as being January the 20th, 1983. So that's where I'm getting the date from. I hope I've got it right, but if the Crown Prosecution Service is saying she's born on January the 20th, 1983, I'll take that. I don't know where she was born. I've gone for Northampton, which is sort of a British city. And as I don't have her time of birth, it doesn't really matter which city I use in the UK. I could take Manchester, I could take London. It wouldn't make any difference to the chart because I don't have an ascendant for her. So this is a chart of this woman who is getting a huge amount of attention. She was released, I think, last Thursday, so she'd served 10 months, and she left prison, and so now she's free to give interviews. And she has been giving quite a lot of interviews, and so it's generally regarded that she is a major problem for the government, and she has described herself, I think, as Starmer's political prisoner. So she may be a Capricorn, she may be an Aquarius, we don't know. So I have her sun at noon on January the 20th as being, I think, 2952 Capricorn. So chances are she is a Capricorn, but it's quite possible she's an Aquarius. And she definitely has the moon in Aries. So when you're dealing with a female chart, you probably should be looking at the moon rather than the sun to get an idea about who this person really is. If you had to generalize Lucy Connolly according to one planet, I would have gone for the moon rather than the sun. So although I don't know what sign her sun is in, I do know what sign her moon is in. And so you could say that she does have many of the attributes of an Aries. So you think about Aries is a woman who is quite impulsive. She says what's on her mind, and she takes the initiative, she takes action. So you can see moon in Aries, she sees that there's been this stabbing, and she responds immediately. she doesn't try to work out what's happening. She doesn't try too hard to work out what's happening. Perhaps she should have waited for a couple of days to have found out what the stabbing was really about. She could have waited, and she could have been more careful about her language. But Moon in Aries, this is what she feels. She's angry about something, and she just responds immediately. And she has said that one of the reasons that she was so upset by this event is because I think 14 years previously or something like that, she'd lost a child when the child was less than 2 years old. The child had died, and so when she sees these other children getting killed, it was particularly upsetting for her. And so I think that very simple Moon in Aries, that you can see it in action. And she was born early 80s, so she was part of a sort of a mini generation that had a conjunction between Jupiter and Uranus. And Jupiter-Uranus conjunction is about being free, saying whatever's on one's mind, if that's the way you feel. I mean, it is a generation, though, so there's no reason why it should necessarily be personal. But if you look at her Mars in Pisces, her Mars in Pisces is square Jupiter, square Uranus, particularly Mars square Jupiter. This is a woman who, she has a lot of energy, and once she gets into her head that she wants to do something, she does it. And you're seeing this in how she's responded to her release. She hasn't just immediately sort of disappeared and been just thankful that she's gone out of prison. No, she feels an incredible sense of indignation, obviously, I think quite reasonably. And she's been giving a lot of interviews, and those interviews, of course, have been widely aired, and they are seen as a genuine threat to the government. They've made the government's situation, even worse, and it really has highlighted not just the issue of immigration, but the issue of free speech. And I think that officials in the Trump government have said they want to talk to her. So it's not just a national issue. I mean, the Trump regime has noticed what's going on, and of course, in the US, they've been quite sort of critical of what's going on in Europe. That people are sort of losing their ability to have free speech. You can literally go to prison for tweeting something. Even if you delete the tweet a few hours later. Now, the planet that I really want to focus on is Mercury. I think her Mercury logically should be important. And if you're tweeting, that's a Mercury activity. And so her Mercury is at 20, she's got her Mercury at around 20 degrees Capricorn. It is retrograde. And as far as her Mercury is concerned, I think I'm right in saying that it's relatively unaspected. I mean, using major aspects, so that Mercury might be a bit out of control. But there's one aspect that it certainly has, and that is a semi-square to Uranus. So you can see that Mercury is 45 degrees, sorry, not Uranus, I mean Jupiter. So Mercury, semi-square Jupiter. And I do emphasize in these videos that if you are doing astrology, you absolutely must look at semi-squares and sesquiquadrates. There's no compromise there. A close semi-square or sesquiquadrate is more important than a trine or a sextile. I really must make that clear. And she has Mercury semi-square Jupiter. And so Mercury semi-square Jupiter is about talking a lot. It can be. It's about tweeting a lot. It's perhaps about not knowing when to stop. And that Mercury semi-square Jupiter may be the most important planet in the most important aspect in her chart. Yeah, even though it's a semi-square, at least in relation to her tweet. Mercury semi-square Jupiter it doesn't matter perhaps that Mercury's in Capricorn. And there is a view in astrology, particularly amongst people who use midpoints. You don't have to worry too much about the sign. It's just the fact that Mercury is semi-square Jupiter. And so let's look at her chart on the 90-degree dial, just to get some more information about how that Mercury is working. So here is, where's her Mercury gone? So there's her Mercury. So you can see, because she's got Mercury semi-square Jupiter, and I don't know how close that semi-square is because I don't have a time of birth, you can see that semi-squares and sesquiquadrates are shown as oppositions on the 90-degree dial. So there is Mercury and Jupiter really coming together there. And there is an exact aspect involving, on that midpoint, her Mercury and her Jupiter, certainly her Mercury, is on the Mars-Uranus midpoint. So if you've got Mercury on the Mars-Uranus midpoint, you can get yourself into trouble through what you say and through what you tweet. And there is a nervousness there. Maybe nervousness isn't the right word. There's just a sense of sort of inner turmoil, which is easily exaggerated by external events. And so here we've got a mind which is very active, perhaps overactive, and Mars-Uranus, how she responds to a Mars-Uranus event, and we've got Jupiter on the Mars-Uranus midpoint as well. So this configuration involving her Mercury and her Mars, Uranus, Jupiter is really a major part of who she is. And we can see that she's not just done her tweet, she's now doing interviews all over the place. And so that is reflected by, I think, Mercury opposition Jupiter and Mercury on the Mars-Uranus midpoint. And so then we have to consider the transits. What was going on when she made the tweet? Now, as far as I know, she made the tweet on July the 29th, 2024 at 8:30 p.m. I mean, I looked at, maybe I've got that time wrong. And so the stabbing, which she responded to, had taken place the same day at, I think, 11:47 a.m. So she made the tweet, I think, that evening at 8:30 p.m. So this is the time this is when she made the tweet. And so if that 8:30 is right, then you've got Pluto rising, and so that's when she made the decision to tweet. Maybe she didn't make any decision at all. It was a very impulsive thing she did, and the Moon was making a conjunction to Uranus, and the Mars was starting to make a conjunction to Jupiter. Remember, she has Mars square Jupiter, in her horoscope, and so what sort of transits was she experiencing at the time of this? At the time of the tweet. So at the time she made the tweet, Mercury was at 2 degrees Virgo. So Mercury was opposition her Mars, and Mercury was starting to move towards her Mars-Jupiter. So she's got a Mars-Jupiter square and a Mars-Uranus square. And so, I mean, quite a wide Mars-Uranus square. But remember, her Mercury is on her Mars. There's her Mercury. There's her Mars-Uranus. So in fact, she's got Mercury conjunct the Mars-Uranus midpoint. So it's really quite a configuration there. And so Mercury opposition her Mars that set her off. She responded to the event. Her Mars just had to do something, and so her Mars just tweeted. That was what she did. I mean, you can look at other things going on. She had recently had Pluto on her Sun. We don't know quite when, but over the previous year or two. So that's something that maybe sort of contributed to stirring things up. And additionally, look at Mars. Mars was at 6 degrees. Mars was at 6 degrees Gemini. So Mars was opposition her Uranus, and there was Mercury. So there was a Mercury-Mars square in the sky at the time of her tweet, indeed at the time of the Stockport stabbing, and it did hit quite an important configuration in her chart. And then there is solar arc directions. Now, with solar arc directions, it really would be nice if I had a time of birth, but I don't have a time of birth. So I did her solar arc directions. So she at the time of her tweet, I think she was 41 years old. So I moved everything 41 degrees. And so the question is, do we have any solar arc contacts here? And we certainly do. Her solar arc Uranus is at 19 degrees 53 Capricorn. So her solar arc directed Uranus was right conjunct her Mercury. And so this was a time when her Mercury was really activated, just that whole year, year either side, 20, from maybe 2023 to 2025, her Mercury is heavily activated by Uranus. And so what does she go and do? She goes and tweets. I mean, what else can she do? I mean, that is what she's going to do. I mean, that's what she did do. And I think that really shows the solar arc directed Uranus on her Mercury. You can see what stirred her up. And then look at her solar arc directed Mercury. Her solar arc directed Mercury was at 2 degrees 6 Pisces. So solar arc directed Mercury was on her Mars. So that Mars, that anger, was being stirred up by her solar arc directed Mercury. And then if we think about the transits, we remember that Mercury was at 2 degrees Pisces when she made the tweet. So Mercury was opposition her Mars, her transiting Mercury was opposition her Mars, and also her solar arc directed Mercury was opposition her Mars, and that was really what triggered her. So that's it. I think that Lucy Connolly's chart is interesting, even though we don't have a time of birth. So thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.